Hello, good afternoon to everybody. I am Barri-Jon Graham, one of NQA's regional assessors. I'm here today to talk to you about a topic which has been at the forefront of the news and hopefully everybody's thought processes recently, and that is, of course, business continuity and the practice of remote working. Towards the latter end of the presentation, we'll also look at remote audit specifics. But in the meantime, we'll focus on business continuity and the security aspects of working from home. There are plenty of guides for staying sane and staying safe online while at home and working. So ultimately, what I've tried to do is condense all of that information into a half an hour or so bite-sized webinar to give you a flavour of some of the things to look for in all three of the things we're going to cover today. But clearly there is more information out there. So this webinar is a reflection of like I said, a condensing of various parts of information I've pulled together. So if there is appetite to learn more about a particular topic, specifically business continuity, we have a webinar coming up on the 10th of July. Likewise, remote working and staying safe at home, there's a webinar date to be confirmed, but that will be coming along soon too. So yeah, this does kind of skirt through and scratch the surface of a number of issues. So if you want more detail, then stay tuned to NQA's webpage for further information about webinars to enhance what you're going to learn today. So consider this like a foundation step. One thing we can do though is talk through what you see on the screen there, business continuity and remote working safely. So let's dive into that. So as it says on the screen there, there is a large global client base with NQA, and we have been serving these clients for over 30 years now. So we have a lot of experience, and you can rest assured if you choose us, you will be in good hands. We work with a number of clients, both on a global and local scale, and this includes single standard systems or integrated management systems on over complex multi-site organizations. So no matter who you are or who you represent, we can adopt our approach to support you as an individual client. I always enjoy starting presentations or webinars in this case with a bit of a appropriate quote, and I don't think in the circumstances we find ourselves in now there has been a more appropriate quote to sort of convey ultimately a lot of work that went on before pandemic struck. Nobody, I think, hand on heart, had pandemic as a risk and a likely continuity scenario. However, lots of organizations do a lot of work to ensure continuity across a variety of potential challenges, and those who have spent time perfecting that plan have found this process far easier to endure in those circumstances. You may have heard from the marketing team to give an overview of what's going to go on today, but here is a very quick scope. Please don't worry if you miss anything. As I say, more detail will be provided further down the line, and all subscribers to this webinar will receive the slide deck and a copy of the webinar once it's concluded. NQA's contact details and my personal contact details will be hosted on the very last slide of this webinar, and I'm available to discuss anything which covered, which you need more detail on, or things which are relevant, such as ISO certification. So let's go straight into business continuity planning. So very quickly then, to those who are unfamiliar with the concept, and this came as a result of a question which was asked to me before the first iteration of this presentation, contingency planning. So we have contingency plans, but why is this not a business continuity plan, and what differences are there? Simply, a contingency plan is a course of action, a single course of action, which is designed to help respond when something unexpected has happened, which stresses your routine or a plan you had in place. It could be considered as a plan B if the anticipated results of the first plan are not realized. Contingency plans are really important components of a wider business continuity plan or disaster recovery protocol, and absolutely key to risk management strategy. For example, a series of contingency plans will formulate a large portion of a business continuity plan. However, on its own, it is not enough. You need to do more to fully realize continuity when resilience is required due to adverse circumstances you could not anticipate. So what is a business impact analysis? The BIA, or Business Impact Analysis, is the first critical step in developing a business continuity plan. In this phase of it, you're required to identify critical business operations, which you need to keep going, for example. Additionally, you need to consider any related resources which are required for employees to perform those functions you've identified. An effective analysis of this not only identifies these elements, it requires to be effective a data set to prioritize business continuity efforts. And why data? When you think about continuity, you might present things which you look at on a scale. At one end, you have what you might call an inconvenience, something which is ultimately undesirable but manageable. Another at the end of the scale is obviously disastrous and possible irreparable harm. So it's important that when you develop a BIA that you make this distinction. Every department in an organization will naturally feel that they should be the focus of a recovery effort, and this is based on their importance to the organization as a whole. However, if you try to resource inconvenience, there will be a drain on resources and finite resources at that. And that brings the need for data into the equation. When you're conducting your BIA, there are no template solutions which apply to every organization every single time. That is why time that is spent planning is absolutely vital. It allows a fully customized plan to be generated and to mitigate risks effectively. So when we're looking then at operations at risk or risk assessment of operations, this includes possible risks with key operational functions, which would greatly disrupt a business and customer continuity. It also involves the magnitude of risks to each function, which will help a business continuity plan stakeholders decide on appropriate strategies. So let's take a notional example of an operation, a customer support function. Okay, and the description of this operation could be that, for example, let's say customer support teams who operate on a 24-hour global operations of live chat, for example, and customer calls across the US, EMEA and APAC regions. Its impact, its loss would be critical. So the impact description, therefore, is 100% of live chats go to a customer support team in Europe, for example, and 20% of live calls are then rerouted to a Southeast Asia office. So the disruption would mean no more live chat support in this circumstances, and customers experience a significant wait time when calling in. So appropriate action and identification of resources to meet that need would need to be raised. So how do you develop your own BIA for your organization? So when you're developing an impact analysis, you need to look at every single department, team and or area of your organization. As you do so, there are three things to consider. One is the timing or duration of the likely outage, its operational impacts, and clearly boardroom stuff, financial impacts. So for example, if a function cannot continue to operate for an hour, a day, or a week, how does this impact your service delivery or production? For customer-facing areas, the impact can be measured fairly easily, but in other areas, the costs might not be apparent. So you need to consider things such as reputation, employee relationship, vendor relationship, and any obligations you have to legislation or regulatory conditions. Don't just assume costs if there's no data. In most cases, there will be data which will exist to provide something quantifiable to be associated with your impact. You need to think about it long before it is needed. A recovery strategy outlines all of the relevant procedures to restore business operations after an incident or a crisis. A really good recovery strategy can include realistic recovery timelines and essential emergency resources. This should also be based around the outputs of the business impact analysis and the risk assessment you've already completed. So in ISO 27001, IT personnel or ICT personnel and BCP stakeholders should operate alternate backup programs and servers to help save customer requests after a power outage, for example. Customer support should be able to receive these requests and respond to customers within an acceptable timeframe, which has been predetermined. In ISO 22301, resource requirements are outlined at 834, and you need to consider resources which include, but might not be limited to, people, information and data, physical infrastructure, equipment and consumables, IPP systems, logistics, finance, and any partners and suppliers who are involved. So there's a whole host of things to think about there when you're in a recovery strategy. situation. Okay, there's all kinds of things, but ultimately, considering what resources you need is a really important step. And once you've got your impact analysis and recovery strategy outlined, then the most important part, arguably, is to plan and to test. So commit the information you have gathered to a plan and outline that plan and how you are going to step back to recovery based on the scenario you have faced. So whether you've got an ISO 22301 or an ISO 27001 system in place, there is a requirement to verify that your plan is effective. And that should be undertaken as often as you are able. You know, there is no minimum requirement outlined in 27001, for example, but the best plans that are out there and the most effective plans we've seen in response to COVID are the ones that's been tested and stressed and realigned based on findings of verification activity. So ultimately, you need to test once you've established a plan. Simply having a plan is not enough in itself. And that's it. Ultimately, it is a very quick whistle-stop tour of a 22301 and some aspects of 27001. This is not designed to be a comprehensive implementation guide. However, as I mentioned at the start, NQA on the 10th of July will be doing a business continuity plan webinar, which is specific to ISO 22301. So now that we are all working from home, the situation we find ourselves in is a little bit different. A lot of organizations can seamlessly transition from a communal, go to the office kind of model to a teleworking model with absolutely no change of pace whatsoever. However, for a lot of organizations, working from home is something completely new and a different set of risks and understanding of threats which are out there are required to be considered. So what I've tried to do here is take information from various sources, which tries to outline some of the common things which organizations who don't ordinarily have teleworking in place, some of the things which you may need to consider. So, some remote users who don't ordinarily work from home may need to use different software or be familiar with applications they're not ordinarily used to. So for example, people who come into the office every day may not realize that logging into a VPN, for example, is part of the requirement of working from home or part of the best practice requirement for teleworking. So in those circumstances where there is new software or new applications to be used to ensure safety at home, then whoever is responsible for applying those policies should attempt to generate a how-to guide. You know, it says how do I there. That's based on NCSC writing, but ultimately, if you're responsible for generating policies and raising awareness of policies and maintaining personnel understand their obligations within those policies, then a simple cut through the jargon guide to help people who don't ordinarily work from home should be considered. It's a matter of fact of life that personnel who are working from home are more likely to lose, damage, or have their devices stolen when they are away from the office, okay? So appropriate risk capture there should take place. Most staff know who to go to when they're in the office to report a problem, but in some circumstances, there may be problems and incidents which occur in the comfort of their own homes, and they have no idea how to reach in and report the problems which are required. So bit of communication there to make your personnel aware of what channels to go through if there is a problem or an incident they're not happy with when they're working from home. We've already touched on VPNs. They are a good resource, but as a lot of organizations I've audited are finding out, they're not designed for the surge of demand which has occurred because people are now working from home. So if you are responsible for VPN and VPN maintenance, please make sure that the increased demand subject to teleworking practice is there to be met. And finally, again, something I've seen directly so that people are falling foul of is software updates and patching, for example, and the use of USB sticks, which is not permitted in the office to work in, are being used at home to transfer information from a completely unprotected machine to a office network, a networked organizational machine. Okay, clearly this is not good. So consider when you give your employees some assets to use at home, that the appropriate software updates can be done automatically. Patches are applied, and that any removable media or USB assets in place are disabled, for example, or at least restricted in use. Okay, that's just a few things. That isn't an exhaustive list of some of the things, but these are based on audit findings from me personally. So it is a really good sort of simple overview of some of the common faults I've found. So who's trying to get to this information you're using at home? Okay, there is a large sort of area of what we call threat actors. These are people who are out there trying to get to information for various reasons. Okay, regardless of the size or type of organization you work for, it's absolutely paramount that everybody understands why every individual may be vulnerable to a cyber attack and what measures to take to defend yourself. Okay. The advice summarized within this slide and this webinar is applicable to absolutely everybody whilst working at home, whether you're an ICT professional or a complete novice who's just been given the first ever laptop, okay? All organizations who have ISO 27001 or a similar system in place will already have policies which outline some of the things which is discussed on screen, okay? Everybody should be familiar with these policies. So if you're a member of staff who've been asked to work from home, make sure you reach in and find and understand these policies. And likewise, if you are responsible for generating and disseminating the policies, make sure that this is done. So who's the threat then? Online crime. This is probably the most encountered one, okay? And these are experts in chasing information, which leads directly to identity theft for monetary gain. i.e. phishing or ransomware are two commonly used phrases you might have encountered before. There are also hackers who they can work in groups or alone, and they're not often specifically targeting anything in particular. They're just testing their own individual skills against your security provisions, okay? So again, going back to a point I made on the previous slide, it's really important that people are aware of reporting channels so that they can raise awareness if they suspect that something like this is taking place. I've named some other online threat actors there, although ultimately state-sponsored group, political activists and terrorists have very specific and niche reasons why they might be, try to undertake a cyber attack. It's unlikely you'll encounter them, but they're worth noting that they exist. Employees account for most online cyber breaches. Honest mistakes can be made and they can have far-reaching consequences. Think about what data you're processing and what you potentially are exposing to people all of the time. We may have all sent an email to the wrong address, but with GDPR, Data Protection Act and equivalent legislation across the world, there are now implications to breach of data in this respect. Very quickly, going to look at phishing and smishing. So everybody's kind of heard of phishing, and that's where people try and get your information by sending you an email with a link that doesn't quite lead to where it suggests it may lead, and then you'll be asked to perhaps input information in order to win the prize or pay the fine, whatever it looks like. Okay, now smishing is the SMS equivalent, and I've put a little picture on there from the UK, which shows a common smishing attempt, and that was taken from that is a stock image, but ultimately a lot of people who have been put into a position of lockdown as a result of this pandemic may have received a similar text. There's also a spoofing, and what is spoofing is if you've got, for example, my mobile phone provider send me pretty much regular monthly updates about, for example, what my bill might be, or if they're out in the office for upgrades, for example. So there's an established pattern of them communicating with me. So when I look at my text messages, I can see that there is a trusted source for all intents and purposes. Now, spoofing, cyber criminals, one of those threat actor groups, have figured out a way to throw a text in there which isn't from the trusted source in this instance. So for all intents and purposes, a person looking at their mobile device would see a text message which they think is from a trusted source, but it isn't. It's from a criminal group who are attempting to get information for free. So these are things to be aware of, and definitely things you can test your employee base against to make sure they understand. So what can you do about it? So when you're conducting yourself online, you should honestly have a look at how you present yourself online. Okay, not just because of professionalism in your role, but if you, for example, are moving information from a private asset to a organizational provided asset, then you might be moving information across which is not needed from one to the other, and there's a potential risk there. Furthermore, how much information you give away can lead to identification of you as an individual, and it opens a channel of attack from a cyber criminal. So what I put on screen there is some examples of things everybody can do to have a look at how they conduct themselves online and maintain the smallest digital footprint possible. About halfway down the slide, you can see there is a little green bar at the top of the search panel, which suggests that that website we're looking at there is completely safe, okay? And what we're looking for is a green lock, and that means it's a secure SSL certificate. You don't need to know so much about that, but HTTPS is a secure SQP online. So look for that whenever you providing information to a website or providing payment details to a website, for example. Make sure it's safe. If it isn't, then don't provide them with information. Consider changing your web browser. Obviously, when you move from one website to another and then to another, you leave a trail of who you are, your IP address, your cookie details, for example, and that is private information. And if you don't want that being distributed across the internet as you go browsing, then if you use a web page such as DuckDuckGo, there are many out there. I use DuckDuckGo, so I've chosen that. Then it doesn't leave information on websites you visit. Quite often when you use this website, you'll be given an alert panel when you first get into a web page to say, can we have cookies? And you obviously click no and carry on browsing and everything's safe. So by way of further example, what I've done on the screen there is if you look to the left, there is a web page called Have I Been Pwned, P-W-N-E-D. And as you can see there, I put my email address in. If that email address has been breached and been subject to exchange of information on the dark web, for example, as a set of records which has been breached, it's not necessarily that somebody's attacking an individual, but your email address could be exposed in areas you don't want it to expose. So it's a free resource. You don't have to pay for anything. Just go into that, type in your email address, and it will tell you if you appear in places you don't want it to appear. If you do appear, don't worry, just underneath where it says good news for me, and it may say bad news for you, if you try this, it may tell you where the breach has occurred. So for example, if you read the news and there's been a large breach of information by X, Y, and Z airlines, if you use your email address to communicate with that airline at some point in the past, then you could appear as a breach record within this web page, and it'll tell you how and why. And obviously you can assess what kind of risk that poses to you and take action accordingly. In the middle, I've given DuckDuckGo, so that's the page you go to. If you just Google DuckDuckGo and then type it in and then click on that, and then that's it. It gives you all the information you need when you're on that web page. And then finally, in the UK, the government's National Cyber Security Centre provides all kinds of free advice and training and cyber safe and cyber awareness initiatives. Okay, these are free resources in most circumstances. I urge you, if you are in the UK or can visit it from outside, then please do. But go into there, have a little look around. There's lots and lots of really useful stuff on there, which is not only going to help you be more safely productive at home, so to speak, but it gives you an idea of the kind of breaches which can occur and how they occur and the things you can do to prevent that from happening. Okay, that's the next level of detail from what I'm going through during this webinar. So yeah, I would urge you to have a little play around with those suggested websites I've seen there. So to sort of approach the wind down to this webinar, most of the information I've shown you in this presentation, especially the points at which I sort of direct you to think about some of the things you can do as an organization, are based on evidence I've gathered when I've been conducting remote auditing. Now, there may be some people who are due to have a remote audit in the near future, or have been offered a remote audit and not quite sure what to do with it. I would urge you to undertake this. Okay, it's a really, really useful endeavor. A remote audit is clearly one that's conducted completely or at least partially away from your place of work, off-site. The audit will cover everything that's usually covered when we visit you, but it uses technology to support the assessor when a site visit cannot be undertaken. So we are easing restrictions a little bit now. However, there is still a requirement to maintain social distancing, and if there is absolutely no appetite to accept visitors, then we can do a remote audit. So what should you expect if you're going to be party to this? The audit will typically be in the same duration bracket as your on-site audit. You'll need to be available throughout the audit program, and the auditor will send you a program about 6 weeks before the audit is scheduled. And you'll be guided into a Microsoft Teams conference call, or if you can provide an alternative which is safe, then we can use that too, okay? Remote audits are best delivered using screen share capability, and this reduces the amount of data and information which is transferred outside of your organization, okay? You might be asked to email some documentation, and that's inevitable in some circumstances. However, any information you do send to NQA will be managed in accordance with our confidentiality and data privacy policies. Some things to consider if you are preparing for remote audit. As you would expect, it's heavily reliant on technology. Therefore, a few simple pre-audit logistical points to consider to make sure you're ready is to test the system you want to use. So if you want to host using Teams or GoTo, then please test these before you start the audit. If you don't have access to a system like this, or you're not really sure how it can work, then speak to your assessor. When he sends you your audit plan, then just say, we don't know how we're going to facilitate this, and then we can work to that. Okay, I personally have done that on a few occasions. We've done it using telephone calls, emails, and FaceTime for a site tour. Okay, not ideal, but it was effective. Please ensure, obviously, that anybody who's going to be required to answer questions is available as per the audit plan. Clearly, don't bring people in who are on furlough, but if there is an alternative individual or entity we can speak to, then we'd be happy to do so. Documentation will be requested. If you've been subject to an audit before, then hopefully you'll understand what's required, and this is a well-practiced procedure. If this is your first time, however, then the auditor may need policies and activities which you are under scope. So collating these in a central repository before the audit can start is good preparation. Perhaps the most important aspect of this is just to relax, okay? I've also commuted a matter of yards through children's toys and pets to get to the office from my bedroom. I've got all kinds of parental responsibilities, and I need refreshments throughout the day too, so we won't force anybody to sit in front of a screen and be subject to an audit all day, all throughout the day. Okay, there's plenty of time to stretch legs and go off piste, so to speak, and engage in non-audit situational chat. We're here to help, and we're here to maintain your management system when it's required through this time of resilience. Okay, it's just as important to us as it is to you. As I've suggested, there are a number of things which we need to complete the audit, and that's personnel, documentation, and a review of any processes which go on site. So if you've had to close a production line, so to speak, then we don't need to see that production line evidence because it's closed. However, if you are still producing and still delivering a service, then we would expect to see some of the process review documentation which goes with that. Site tours can be done even in a remote audit situation. Like I've said before, we've done these on FaceTime, using WhatsApp, and using pre-identified points of view from a security perspective. So it can be achieved. Just, I think, to summarize this, it's important to engage with and work with your auditor throughout the whole process. Okay, like I said, the second you have the plan, you have the person who's going to conduct your audit at the end of the phone. So please do pick up that phone and speak to them, or drop them an email and communicate, and together you'll come to some sort of effective solution about how the audit can progress. In terms of learning points, there's quite a few things I've come across, and I think that I could have done better from the first time I've done it right the way through to the one I concluded yesterday. So I think I've committed the most common findings and common learning points to the screen there. Commit to the dates as though it were on site. Okay, simply put, if you're in a position to conduct the audit, then please do that. Don't seek to delay if you can help it. Clearly, there are some circumstances where it just cannot occur, but ultimately, if you've got a date in the diary, if you commit to that, it can happen. If you've got a business continuity plan, then accepting the audit and being able to go through the process is evidence that it's partially working at very least. I would say that if you have been in a position where you've had to make decisions which have changed the way you do things, such as moving from a communal office-based model to a teleworking remote model, then record everything, log absolutely everything which has occurred since you've been forced to undertake the changes. This serves as a really useful handrail when you're reviewing plans and policies and procedures further down the line. When you're doing the audit, when the audit's happening, aim to expose and not disclose in every circumstances. Inevitably, on some occasions, technology restrictions means that you can't share screens or you can't expose using technology everything we need to see. Some things are hard copy information, for example, but where you can, just expose the auditor to the information they need rather than fully disclose, sending documents and large pieces of information on email. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it's best practice to be able to just demonstrate using technology the things that occur. As I said before, for 22301, 27001, and the Privacy Information Management System 27701, this activity here is evidence of BCP verification, so record it. And the routine you have right now could potentially be a more efficient way of working further down the line. The more we do remote working, the more the possibilities are open to us. Okay, so if you can and have recorded a log, then it can be used to make these kind of decisions and provide data, more importantly, for any decision which follows. So ultimately, by way of recap, that is it. Okay, by way of recapping the whole presentation and this webinar, planning for adversity is absolutely paramount to ensure recovery, and not just be responsive to what's happening, preempt. Nobody can preempt a pandemic, clearly, but the people can preempt their building not being available, key personnel not being available, servers not being available. There are things you can do before they happen, okay? So any planning you do is not time wasted. Understand and quantify business processes, okay? There is data available, there are impact information available to you, okay? So consider what these are, and when you're doing your BIA, or your business continuity plan, put these into practice. Don't rest on your laurels. As I said in the first part of the presentation, refinement of your plan is just as important as generating your plan. So once you've got your plan, stress test it and see what you could do better the next time around. When working at home, the threats are more potent and the risks are hugely increased when in teleworking, okay, especially for organizations that don't ordinarily have a teleworking remote model, okay? So it's important at the very least you capture and understand the risks and threats out there, and hopefully this webinar has given you some ideas on how to do that. Everybody ultimately is responsible for security, okay? It's not just the sport of management or the responsibility of the IT team. In any given organization, absolutely everybody can report an incident, identify an incident, and raise awareness. So everybody is responsible for security. Understanding where the vulnerabilities lie, that should be done. That should be a constantly evolving and changing process. Okay, where you are vulnerable, where are the threats, and what can you do about it? Okay, identification of this. If you've got an ISO system in place, you have the perfect hosted mechanism to do this. And finally, covered in the last section, remote audits are a viable method of maintaining your certification. Okay, really important to us that you keep that going, just as it's important to you to keep this going. Keep smiling. We're almost there, I think. So much so, I don't think we're planning on doing another remote audit webinar, but certainly, as I've suggested, that we are doing a business continuity and secure working webinar further down the line. So that's it from me. Please do keep in touch. Keep an eye out for further information on webinars on the NQA webpage, or Rowan and our marketing team will be in touch via email. In the meantime, if you have any questions which are relating to some of the topics you've seen today, or ISO certification in general across multiple systems, then I'll be happy to answer those. My email address is on the screen there if you want to send me an email. Otherwise, I'll have a quick scan through any questions which have been raised during this presentation now. So yeah, Emma's asked if you can record things on Teams. If you have the suitable bandwidth and capacity to do so. I believe it is possible. Bear in mind that it is very, very difficult to sort of record every instance, just given the size. Some of these audits I've conducted can go on a full working day with breaks, yes, but ultimately the record keeps going. So if you've got the capacity to do so, I think it is possible. Ultimately, though, the best records are once you create a Teams page, obviously the party to the Teams page can record information within. So a good way I found of doing it is to take notes using the chat function. So anytime a decision's made, an action's taken, a finding's been raised, then we can use the chat function in there to sort of generate the information to review later down the line. And obviously document share comes into it, and we can see what's been sent by whom and when. So there is capacity to do it, but that's down to you and your capacity to hold that amount of information. You're very welcome. Okay, remote audits. I've got one planned. Yeah, so yeah, as I suggested in the main body of the webinar, about 6 weeks before you are scheduled to receive your audit, the auditor should be in touch with a plan. And that plan will include things such as documentation required. So if you're new to this, if this is your stage one to get certification, then there'll be a few document names in there you might not be familiar with, or that you haven't labeled it in the same way the auditor suggested it might appear. So, which is why it's important to reach out. So, for example, we may call it, can I have your management review minutes? But using a recent example, they called it the security working group minutes. Okay, so there can be a language difference, but ultimately it says the same thing. That is what you know it as, whereas the auditor hasn't met you yet. So just to avoid any kind of potential conflict in a situation like that, it's important to engage with your auditor as soon as you can. Sarah, you've asked me a question which is beyond my capacity to answer. Well done, you. It's the first one since I've done it. I'm not a health and safety auditor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if you could sort of send me an email, let me go back a screen. If you send me an email on there with your question and your obviously email address will be attached, then I'll make sure it reaches the right ears, okay, to be able to provide you better guidance on that. Okay, Anna, that's another great question, to be honest. You've put a draft program together. Again, I would, remote auditing can occur. So let's just say October. So there's plenty of time there. So your auditor definitely has this on the horizon, okay? It's definitely in their calendar. So as I say, about 2 months to 6 weeks before the audit is scheduled to commence, you'll receive a plan, okay? And you need to work with the auditor to make sure that your program and his plan align and expectations are met. So in some circumstances, like I say, some site tour or where there's specific risks and hazards they know they need to look at from a previous audit, for example, then you need to facilitate that access occurring. If it just cannot occur and nobody can access the particular risk or hazard or instance of review which is needed, then the auditor can delay that particular part of the audit, but it needs to be agreed beforehand. So obviously we can't reach that point on the day and say, oh, we can't do this. So this is why, I sound like a broken record a little bit, but the more you communicate with your auditor ahead of the audit, the better you can understand both the requirement and any workaround which is needed. Again, if you want to ping that question, if you know who your auditor is, then I can, if you send me the email with your question again, I'll make sure it reaches the right auditor. Okay. You're very welcome. Yes, of course, 1 minute. I'll go back. Didn't know I had so many slides. There you go. So yeah, this have I been pwned? Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I've shown my work email address on there because there is no No instances of breach occurred from my work email address. I've also checked every personal email address I run with, and there are no breaches on those either. However, when I've given this kind of advice to people who are struggling to raise awareness of cybersecurity concerns in their organisation, we've tested a few email addresses which have been subject to breach. So that's how I know you get breach information. Okay, so underneath where it says 3 steps to better security on the slide there, on circumstances, yeah, exactly that. So, yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I think that's it in terms of questions which are coming through using the webinar. Like I said, I will go back to the very end. There's my details. If in the aftermath of this webinar you think you want to ask something that you don't want to say out loud, so to speak, in front of the class, then more than happy to reach out and speak with you offline in that respect. So thank you very much to all for joining us. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.